Hello and welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show, Episode 2, coming to you from the wilds of central New Jersey and the tangled places of my mind. And today, actually, I have a treat. Today, I'm here with one of my closest and oldest, I mean that both in terms of age and time, friends, Michael Glazer. Michael is one of the cool people that I want to really base this podcast off of, right? I mean, as we go forward, my show is just going to be the things that I think are interesting, things that I think are fun. And that includes people who are interesting and fun. Michael is absolutely both of those things. I've known him for, I guess, 20 years now, right, Michael? About 20 years we've known each other.
I think crazy. Even a little bit longer than that.
A little bit longer than that, right? He is, I'll tell you something, Michael's one of these guys that I admire so much. And he's always been around to coach me, to help me, to bounce ideas off of, to give me some amazing pizza, because he is a fantastic pizza chef, although that's not really the topic of this show. But he is, like me, a Japanophile and a Japan expert. He's been around for a long time and currently finds himself in Japan. Right now, I'm here from the wilds of central New Jersey. It is evening time, and Japan is, I don't know, sometime tomorrow. And we are sitting around here thinking about a couple of good things to talk about. And that's today's topic is a few things to talk about. And we'll get to that as we go. But Michael is an expert on organizational behavior, on learning and development, and communications, having worked across tech, finance, PR agencies, currently in the organizational development space, consulting with major companies, global companies, local companies, based out of his office in Japan. And his specialties include leadership and personal development as well. And for some reason, he's allowed me to continue to be his friend. And I'm hoping that's going to last after today's show. So welcome, Michael. How are you doing?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm great. I'm really happy that we're going to have this conversation.
Yeah. So Michael and I have always felt that Michael and I are at our best when we're just chatting and we're just having a great time. Usually there's beer involved. Yeah. I will admit, I'm not going to lie, often beer and some other forms of Japanese liquors and whatnot, spirits perhaps. But today it is the morning time in Michael's part of the world. And even though it is Saturday night here, out of deep respect for my friend, I am currently teetotaling. I am not, I haven't had anything to drink yet. I will after this, I guarantee that, right? So I wanted to start off because early this week, if you've heard my first episode, early this week, I talked about something called shiteration, right? I had a little chat with Mike about it earlier as well, but shiteration is the idea of making the decision to start something, to go forward and move something, even though when you first do it, it is going to be shit. So you start off with something knowing that the quality is not going to be great, and with the purpose of iterating as you go to eventually come out with something that is of quality. And why I found this fascinating, Michael, is, as you know, we've talked about this for ages, again and again. I've got lots of ideas and I always try to get them started. And I have this history of going, yeah, I'm just about there, but then not following through. Right. And partially it is due to my conversations with you, I have to say, that the urgency built, the motivation built, the shame I saw every time I looked in the mirror built. And finally, I just made that decision and decided to do the podcast, for example. So I am clearly shiterating this podcast, right? I'm not saying today's episode is shit at all because you are here and it cannot be. By definition, this episode cannot be shit because you are here. But I'm learning as we go, as we all are. And I started last week. Who knows? And I'm iterating, and it's going to get better and better as I go. So, Michael, what do you think about this whole idea of shiteration? Is there something that comes to mind? Is there anything that experience you've had where you know that it's been not so great when you started and it got better as you went?
I think everything, in a word, gets better as it goes. I can't really think of a situation, an instance where it's started off perfectly and it's gone in the opposite direction. So yeah. I guess to me, it's a very natural way of doing things. And
I think that's an important thing. It's natural, right? It's natural. I mean,
yeah.
I was found myself overthinking things, right? And not following through or not doing something because of whatever number of unnatural reasons. But when you kind of let nature take its course, I think sometimes that you got to let it go and just make stuff happen, because it's sort of the natural state of things to be a creator.
Yeah. Well, we all, I think creation, or the desire to create, is something that is inherent in everybody. I believe it's part of human nature. And to my knowledge, exceptions aside, people don't create exactly what they want in the first iteration. And, there's plenty of examples, I think, whether you look at business today, or if you look back in history, of people going through their own process of iterating. And part of the value of it, I think, is just to normalize, like, hey, even people who are considered masters in their field, they iterate. So whether you look at literary masters, music masters, there are manuscripts with kind of furious scribblings and crossing outs and things like that. Not everybody, but many people will do that in the process of writing and creating. And I guess I wonder that it's gained this idea of shiterating. Maybe it's getting some attention these days, just because the world is it's so volatile.
Tell me about it.
It's so complex. We realize just how big of a system of systems we're involved in here. And I think people are realizing you can't get it out. You can't get it right the first time. You do have to iterate. So I think it's natural.
That's interesting, though. Like, we're in a system of systems and we're in volatile times. You think about, a future listener might know this, might remember this. A current listener would probably know that we're in the middle of the craziest, worst, most horrific age we've been in many, many years, perhaps. But at the same time, it's just a strange time because of the coronavirus and COVID-19, and the thousands of people around us who are sick or who have gotten sick. And even though at times it feels like we're pulling out of this thing, maybe we, who knows? We're not scientists. Michael's not a scientist, at least as far as I know. Maybe he is. He wears a lot of hats, but I'm
not.
Michael's not.
Most definitely not.
No, but I most certainly am not. But the point is that these volatile times, I think a lot of us are stuck at home, right? Or away from the office, or away from our whatever we are jolted out of our normal environment and placed in this kind of, I suppose it's outside of our comfort zone. It's one way we might want to look at it. And when you're outside of your zone, you tend to see things that I guess you wouldn't see normally. So your perspectives change, and you have the choice of, I think, becoming very inward and navel gazing and kind of woe is me, or and by the way, this is not to say that a lot of people don't have good enough reason to do that, but at least for those of us who are fortunate to be able to work from wherever we can work, we have a different different world on our hands and a different perspective. But I think it opens up at the same time these kind of questions in your mind, like, why did I never do this XYZ, right? Why did I never, why haven't I started?
What is it? And what's your that? What is it that you wish you?
Geez, to me, it's this whole idea of creating things, right? Well, the podcast is one thing, right? And maybe there's a book in it somewhere. Maybe there's I would say like, like many people, the bucket list idea of, there's the trip you want to take, but today travel isn't exactly on the table, right? So, and I am certainly not the only one who feels this way. Any kind of cursory look on social media will show you all the folks out there who are like, okay, I'm going to write that book now. I'm going to start this side hustle now. I'm going to do this podcast now. I mean, Michael, I don't know if you knew, but like podcasting, of course, it's been around for 15 years or so, maybe longer actually. But like I think there's been a pretty good amount, like a good number of podcasts to choose from for at least the last 10, 12 years or so. But it really picked up in the last couple of years, right? Now, because podcasting, for example, is one of the easiest ways I think it has one of the lowest barriers to entry for a creator. All you need is a microphone and a friend, essentially, right? And you can podcast. But I think, I know that there's a lot of new podcasts popping up here and there. And part of that, I think, is because people are just like, all right, now or never, right? We're shiterating together.
So you think the creative process is driven by a sense of urgency? It's got to be now or else ...
No, I mean, I think it's a driver, right? There are certainly plenty of people who have their shit together and can just kind of do it. They know, what, this is what I want to do. I'm making a decision to just make something happen, and I'm going to move forward with that. I'm just going to, whatever my belief system is, whatever my, whatever the constraints are in my life, I'm going to ignore those things, or I'm going to just say, yeah, those are there, or those are there, and I can do this. I mentioned Cliff Ravenscraft before, and he said something to that effect where when you have limiting beliefs, right? And we spoke about this too, Michael, right? There are limiting beliefs that are sort of encoded in you as you from your childhood, from your experiences, from the people around you, any number of reasons. And these limiting beliefs frame up the way that you approach things in life. It gives you the kind of perspective that will either allow you to move forward or not with stuff. And when you decide that you're going to, or when you want to go and be a creator like me. So if I wanted to be a creator, I had all these reasons not to do it. Well, it doesn't sound good enough, or it's not, I'm not, the quality isn't there. I have nothing good to say. And those are because of my limiting beliefs. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's, so there's what I hear there is there's a concept, right? The concept is not good enough. Well, the statement is not good enough. So maybe the concept is, things need to meet a certain standard in order to be brought into existence, in order to be created.
In my case, yeah, I think that's the way I've really been. And what does that lead to? Right? What does that lead to? It leads to heartache. Frankly,
is that what it leads to for you?
Because I mean, it's led, that kind of thinking has led to the fact that nothing can be good enough, right? Or maybe that kind of thinking in combination with perfectionism and like imposter syndrome and all these other buzzy things. That kind of thinking has just stopped me from doing what I really think I want to do. And, I'm just recognizing this, or I've recognized it for a long time. Now I'm taking action. It's better late than
So
never.
what would you say is, in your mind, what's the difference between iterating and shiterating?
I think just like iterating is something that it's not a difference. I think it's a subset maybe, or it's a variant.
Yeah.
So iterating something, like you said, is natural. We do it all the time. I mean, if you have a job, you have to iterate. You know, you at the most basic level, you have an idea. The boss says, oh, okay, I'm not so sure about that idea. We got to fix that idea. And you go back and you fix the idea. Well, what are you doing? You're iterating. Or you have a project. You know, the concept of iteration has been codified in project management for ages. You know, you have a project plan, you go off the plan, you iterate and come back, and then you have a new plan, you know, iterate and replan, right? So iteration is always there, but it's the getting started part, I think. This whole idea of shiteration, I have to laugh because it is kind of funny when you think about it, but it combines the shit or get off the pot, right, with iteration.
Well, that's interesting.
That's my take. That's my take.
So for you, it's inciting action.
Yes, indeed.
Because when I heard it, I had a totally different take. When I heard it, I thought the difference, or I thought you meant the difference, was the different about quality, right? So, like before, you said, you know, you said something about perfection, right? So I was thinking, well, if your standards are high, I have this concept about the level of quality things should be, and if I can't get it to that level of quality, then it's, you know, I don't know, it's not worthy of bringing into the world, right, or putting forth the effort. Whereas the concept of, you know, shit as a standard of quality kind of lowers the bar. Yeah. So it almost gives us permission to create something that's of, you know, low quality, or at least temporarily low quality. At least it's a starting point. And so I was thinking, where? Yeah. Well,
that's that too. So both things can be true at once, right? So, I mean, that is absolutely the way that it was defined by, I read it in a newsletter from a guy named Peter Coyne, who's a copywriter, and it just hooked me. Right. So, but I think initially I thought of it, the way that he said it is similar to what you're saying, right? It's, you know, you have the first iteration will not be a good one. Right. But I think it gives you permission to do something that's of lower quality, because otherwise, where are you going to start? Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, the first one may be of great quality. Yeah, it might be.
Could be.
So we're just wondering, like, maybe this whole thing about shiteration is about giving ourselves, you know, extra permission to just start where we start.
I love that.
You know.
Love that. Give yourself permission to start where you start.
To start where we start. You know, I remember, so this brings up two thoughts for me. One is the now famous video and exercise called the Marshmallow Challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Which came out of Autodesk, right? And the thing was the executives scored in a particular way that was lower than a bunch of kindergarten kids, because the kindergarten kids, they iterated.
Is this the spaghetti thing? Is this the spaghetti tower thing?
Yeah. The dried spaghetti with the marshmallow on top. And they didn't have any kind of hangups about not getting it right and then trying something new. And they were working collaboratively. And I remember, you know, earlier in my career, I had this idea in my head, this assumption that it had to be of a certain level of quality, the first draft. Otherwise, and then you could fill in the blanks. Right. You know, it wasn't worthy of the time of the person I was showing it to. Right. It wasn't deserving of my audience's time or whatever.
Well, do you think
as I've moved?
Oh, go on. You just gave me a thought, but go ahead.
You know, as I move through my career, and especially now in my role, being an outside consultant or resource for leaders and their teams, helping them through things, what I find so often is that, you know, co-creation, just starting, and then engaging in dialogue about where does it lead, is usually the thing that's most helpful, because people find their own answers, and quality is high or low.
Yep.
If it doesn't meet what's wanted, then things tend to morph into some new, different direction. I mean, like you said at the beginning, the Dan Nessel podcast can go anywhere.
Yep.
So, getting something out there is kind of a way to make shared meaning, to create shared story, and to explore. And there's something exciting and invigorating about that. And my experience has been that when people really get involved emotionally in what they're creating, the level of commitment goes up, and then also the level of quality goes up too. And it could really accelerate the creative process.
That's a very eloquent way of saying, if you love what you do, you're going to do it better. Yeah. In some ways, right? Circling back a little bit to what you just said earlier about quality, I just want to kind of modify a little bit my thinking about this whole concept, right? Is you're hired to do a job, right? If this is a professional situation, you're hired to do a job, whether you're 21, 15, 21, 41, or 50 or 70, doesn't matter. You're hired to meet a certain level of quality, right? And I guess it doesn't matter what your particular role is, because every role is entwined with producing something. So you're producing some labor, you're producing something, a piece of writing, you're producing technology, you're producing, leadership, whatever you're producing something. And what you produce has to meet a certain level of quality, a minimum level of quality. You're just going to get in trouble, right? You're going to get, there are consequences if what you hand to your leadership or to your organization is not at the level of quality that it should be. So you shouldn't necessarily have broad spectrum permission to just put shit out anytime you want to when you are responsible to others or in an organization, unless of course you have such a high bar to begin with that when you put something out there, even though you feel it is in your mind shit, right? If it meets the standard of quality still that the client or customer wants from you, maybe you need to give yourself a little permission to not let perfect be the enemy of good in that situation. Yeah. Right. But I think in general, like what I had from the point of personal creation, the point of like actual like taking nothing and creating, a work of art, for lack of a better word. Could literally be art, or it could be a new design on something. It could be a new concept, or whatever it is. That is your own thing. And as such, what's holding you back, right? And if there is anything holding you back, and if something is holding you back, I think that's where the whole shit or get off the pot interpretation brought me, right? If there's something, just okay, forget it, stop overthinking it, just do it. Yeah.
Well, this. So if we're focused on, at least in my mind, if we're focused on the output quality, right? So setting a set of shared expectations, setting norms about how we work and what's expected, of course, is useful and valuable. It makes me think about the agile leadership, agile development.
Right.
Like there's a lot of iteration, and there's no expectation to get it right in the beginning.
In an organization, if you're lucky enough to work for people, an organization that recognize that, yeah. But sure, please go. Yeah. Please, I want to hear more about that. Please tell me more about that. Yeah.
Well, I'm not an expert in agile development, but the concepts really focus around, intense iteration and feedback loops and things like that. And I think when I think about the effectiveness of teams or teams of teams, networks of teams, it's about the one thing that is important is the process. Having a shared agreement about how people will work together. And if part of that agreement, explicit or otherwise, is you got to get it right out the gate, or you have to meet a high level of quality out the gate, that will shape how the group works or doesn't work together, right? Or the work that individuals or small groups do before they bring something to the team, versus if producing quality is viewed as a team sport, and there's a healthy balance between the process of doing it and the ultimate results, then the game's a bit different. I mean, I know, oftentimes today I'll bring, whether it's my own management or a client, I'll bring an idea.
Yeah.
And it's rough. And I know that the quality isn't there, but I think there's something about the idea that's worth talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm confident. So while I know that the quality isn't what I would ever call a final deliverable, I'm confident that working together, we'll figure it out, right? So, or let me put it another way. You said before, if you love what you do, and for me, it's if I love, you could fill in love or respect or a number of other words, but if I love who I'm creating with or for whom I'm creating, even if I'm not an expert, it doesn't matter, because one of my values is learning, and I'm just as happy to flex my learning abilities and my curiosity to figure out with others, or help them figure out whatever the path is to get whatever is wanted or needed.
So when you're in those situations with, clients, customers, teammates, whatever the situation is, and you throw out that idea out there, right? It's not coming from nothing, right? I mean, I suppose. Well, let me rephrase, because, of course, when we are, in brainstorming meetings, or when we're trying to collaborate and come up with a solution to a problem, or even define a problem to begin with, or whatever the case may be, and we're really freewheeling, and we've got that permission from everybody around us. If it's the ideal situation, if you're really in a good situation where you really feel safe to say whatever you want to say, then you absolutely, you're throwing out these ideas, right? For I think much of our life, and many of the situations that we're in, certainly a lot of people out there, maybe they're not like that. Maybe that's not exactly the situation, right? They're not exactly ready to or able to freely say whatever they want to say. And it's a shame, but maybe that's what it is. So, even my past, or sometimes it's just, you got to read the room and figure it out.
Yeah.
But in that case, you have to, when you speak, you can't just deliver some fresh, not tested idea, right? You have to have done some thinking before you get there, or it has to go through your brain a little bit, right? So the start of that process, is that a shiterative process, or is that's before you even get there, or are we digging too deep?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think, my guess is it depends.
Yeah.
Right. So there's that, there's the word, Ubuntu, right? I am who I am because of who you are. And I think we all have facets of our personality, or some people will call it sub-personalities. We are slightly different with different people, or with different groups or teams of people. So what I'm not saying is quality doesn't matter in the beginning.
Right.
All I'm saying is it's not all about quality. Sometimes it's about the dialogue. Sometimes it's about the conversation. Sometimes it's about the connection. And those things can actually become the fuel for driving quality. I was in a meeting once, this is years ago. I was in a meeting once where the head of the company came in after having there was a fairly large problem in the organization. And he called most of the senior staff into this conference room and started to tell people like what they should do to fix it. And one of the team members, agitated, stood up and leaned forward toward him and said, "So wait, are you telling me that you're not going to tap into the hundreds of years of business experience and expertise in the room to figure this thing out? You're just going to tell us what to do?" And wow. the head of the company said, "Yeah, actually I am." Right. So, I think that also has, an impact on, on many things. Quality is one of them. Yeah. So I think how you bring quality into the, like the role that quality plays in the beginning, I think it just depends.
You just sort of opened up a whole nother door, I think, in my head here. And as a combination of some of the things that you were saying and the story that you just told about that sort of totalitarian dictatorial leader who's like, this is the way it is, right? So putting aside this whole idea of creation and being a creative person or being or even if you don't think you're a creative person, when you do need to create something, the shiterative process that we might go through to get to where we want to get to get to quality, that being as it may, right? Inside an organization, to kind of maybe lob the ball back to Michael's world here, inside an organization, it seems to me it would come down to a culture question. Because if you have a boss or a leader who is like that individual you just described, who's going to be comfortable freely associating ideas or throwing out, maybe not ready for prime time concepts and iterating until they're there. So, is there anything about organizations that maybe that's a trick? Of course there is, but what do you see, or what would you kind of highlight about culture, about organizations that can either go one way or the other with regard to this whole iterative process? And is it something that, is a positive or negative in your experience?
Well, I think the culture is not like a national culture type of response. If we're going to think about this in terms of culture.
I specifically meant corporate culture.
There was some research published in PLOS One. I think it was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, maybe even a little bit longer, where they took a look at what kinds of factors contribute to higher quality decisions by teams. And one of them was teams where there is an equal distribution of talking time during the meetings. Another one was having more women on the team. And the third one, if I remember correctly, was something that they called like reading somebody's eyes or words to that effect. I don't remember exactly what it was, but basically being able to pick up, what people are thinking or feeling just by reading their facial expressions. Maybe, being in tune with other people is a different way of putting the same concept. So, Google made these kinds of, not the women part so much, but the speaking up part, everyone feeling comfortable speaking up part. There was a study that they did where they found that psychological safety is one of the best predictors of team performance. I do think and have seen that when people feel safe to speak up, they feel safe to disagree, in an honest way, in a constructive way, and in a candid way. creativity comes easier. In my world, in my work, I often talk about making meetings that are, creative, active, and efficient. And one of the things that you need is you need people to speak up. You need to hear differences of opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, there are structures and things that you can take, that you can create or design to help people do that. But if people don't feel safe in the process of doing that, then I do think it's harder to enter a conversation, enter a meeting, enter a creative process, even a formal one, with less quality, right? If you go with the mindset of, I firmly believe we're going to get there. I don't know exactly what the pathway for getting there is, but I do believe that together we will get there. And this is just a place to start. Let's start.
Yeah.
It's a very different path than I've got to get it, 50 or 60 or 70% of the way there before I feel safe even having the conversation. I mean, those are two very different processes. The relationships involved, are likely to be different. And the sources of quality and the quality itself may also be different. So, again, I just find that creating a culture where those things are true and have, been instilled deeply into the organization, I find the creative process works better there.
It seems like a tall order, right? It's, I'm
not saying it's easy.
Just see,
but these things can be learned. If they're not, if they're not the default of a company or a team or individuals, it's definitely something that people can learn.
How could you how could you teach executives or decision makers, people who are leaders, to get comfortable with that approach? To find more comfort in discomfort, I suppose.
Yeah. Off the top of my head,
I know. I know. That really is like sometimes it's the biggest question, right? Especially, and it just changes depending on who you're talking to and what your perspective is within the organization, But that's the kind of thing like that culture. Organizational culture, is directly reflective of pretty much that issue. It seems. Yeah.
Well, different people are different. Some clients I work with in organizations, they're more likely to believe it if there's published research, right? So they want the data, they want the quantitative data.
Yeah.
Other people need to see the results themselves. So it's experiencing it. And others, I find other leaders are, maybe a little bit more open-minded, willing to say, I'm not sure if I'm bought into this, but let's give it a try. And whether they realize it or not, the way myself and my colleagues at my company work is to take this kind of process. Yes, there's a level of quality before we put anything in front of a client. But in almost every case, we don't start with here's what you should do. We don't prescribe.
Yeah.
We're about co-creating. So it's about here's my experience, here's my thought, and then drawing out from others. And I think the process, getting into that rhythm, that relationship where you're dialoguing, at least in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It's, building on one another's thought without feeling the pressure to come to a conclusion or to debate which ideas are better, just to understand one another and talk about how things relate and interconnect and can be combined in different ways, gets us to a place where we can then kind of get clarity about, like, truly what is wanted, why.
Yeah.
Why does that matter? How will we know when we have it? So getting clear on the vision, the goals, and why that goal matters, not just to the person across the table, but to all of the people who stand to benefit from it. And then we can start making decisions about how do we craft things to create a future that's attractive and meaningful for them. So, there's not one way. I think, again, going back to this concept of the pathway is different for each group or each individual. There's different ways to go at it.
Do you think that might be a function of corporate brand in some ways? Or is it the other way around? Or is it the other way around? So this is my clever way of segueing into something that I read as well, that I was thinking of specifically bringing up to you. And it was in this in Inc. magazine recently, right? The editor of Inc., Scott Omelianuk, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Scott Omelianuk, was talking about his experience with This Old House. Remember This Old House, the show that used to be on PBS and such, and maybe the granddaddy of all of these kind of HGTV, DIY. It was the most original DIY, and somewhere along the way, This Old House lost its way. Right, This Old House started off as, "Hey, man, we just bought this place. We need to renovate it. How can I patch the roof? Right? What can I do as somebody who is like has 5 thumbs on one hand? Like, I need help, but I at the same time want to learn how to do it myself." Right? It evolved from something like that to this kind of almost what we see more recently in these kind of these stories about, I forget the names of some of the shows, but about flipping and flipping properties and renovating, and where you have just people come in to renovate and flip a house, and they have to do the most expensive thing out there, and then put the best floor down and get the best people into. So in other words, if you were an original viewer of This Old House, you could no longer relate. It's no longer relevant because the mission of This Old House had changed. Right? The original mission of This Old House was probably something closer. The original brand really was probably something akin to let's try our best. Right? It was about trying. It was about working to create something, that anybody could really do. Then eventually it evolved into something that was not that. Right? That was very different. And when the show, or when This Old House got back onto the property, I guess it seems to me it became part of the publishing empire of Mr. Omelianuk's company. They went back and they revisited, and they went back to the original core of what that brand was. They went back to the original core of brand purpose. Instead of being instead of being like, some kind of specialized home building thing, what he says here is the brand purpose evolved from being the best to trying our best, to offering with inspiration, information, and instruction, and most important, understanding all the things people need to make a house a home. And to do so as the very best neighbor would, kindly, generously, and if not always perfectly, with good intentions. So like to rediscover, that's the core of the brand, right? So you got to imagine that if they understand that that's the core of that's their brand purpose, right? Maybe the brand purpose is really what lies beneath the behavior, or the behaviors, I suppose, of a company's leadership team, or vice versa. Maybe the company's leadership team is what makes the brand purpose what it is. I don't know. Maybe it's a little chicken and eggy there. But, and this touches, I'm sure there are so many tendrils we can kind of follow from this. There's so many things once you open up the brand can, there's a lot of worms in there, but I don't know, just something I thought that was interesting, and sort of fit.
I don't know if this is true, but my unscientific take is that, recently, and when I say recently, I don't know, maybe the past couple of years, maybe a little bit longer, who knows? I think people are waking up, societies or waking up to find that they have, to varying degrees, lost their way, so to speak. Consumerism is, has a very powerful voice, place, and impact in our society. And if you look at the beginnings of positive psychology, they found that, sort of the material aspects of life really don't provide kind of any dividend on what makes a happy life.
Interesting. So
I'm wondering that, as people wake up to, hey, consumerism, materialism, personal curation, creating these perceptions or whatever of perfection or high polish, are kind of empty. I think at an individual level, people are revisiting, like, what's my purpose? And I think on a larger level, you hear business leaders like Larry Fink at BlackRock, who are talking about, setting corporate policy about where they're going to or not going to invest, in part on the purpose of the organization and how they contribute to society. So whether you're looking at the SDGs aspect of it and collective impact, there's a lot of exciting things going on there in companies like FSG, or organizations like FSG, which I will say we are involved in, to more individual basis, right? There's programs on purpose leadership, or this concept of personal branding. What's your purpose? My last company, I worked for a CEO who, if you got in the elevator with him and got into a conversation, it was likely he would say, "So what do you do for the firm? What's your purpose here?"
Oh, nice.
Not in a values-driven way, but what do you do? And if you didn't have an answer for it, it wouldn't end very well.
That would not be scary at all. That would be such an easy conversation to have. Oh my God.
But I do think people today are paying more attention to, what are my values? What is my purpose? What matters to me? Because these days, I'm guessing, again, just people feeling maybe a little bit empty or unfulfilled. The soul's a little bit hungry for something more on one end, and then with COVID and the extreme VUCA-ism that's going on right now,
volatile, uncertain,
complex,
and I'm sorry,
and ambiguous.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Being able to hold on to, identify what's true and kind of control what you do based on your purpose, may be especially attractive during these times.
I'd imagine.
I don't know. How does that sound to you?
Sounds great to me, actually. It just sounds like everything. Like, it sounds like it is completely aligned with what some of the leading thinkers are saying these days, especially about, where we're headed, and what we have to look forward to. And, we're not going to know what the real effect of all this is on our own companies and on the places we work, but I've been paying attention as a communicator and as a marketing guy. I pay attention to what other organizations are doing, to what marketers and communicators are doing out in the marketplace these days. And purpose, man, is evolving moment to moment now with the advent of COVID-19. And it's not only because of the disruption that you've seen now in pretty much every market, and certainly among whole different industries could potentially become extinct because of this thing, right? It's not only because of that, it's also because of the way that it's changing the behaviors we need in order to work together. And to work together but be apart is such a new thing for so many people. I mean, I'm sort of, I guess, in some ways a little bit lucky in that I have years of remote working experience. So when I got the order to stay at home and work, I'm like, okay, it's just another day. Right now, this is dragging on for a long time, and now things are a little bit different because not only do I have to stay at home and work, which I had been doing anyway, but now I don't have an outlet to even go see people in person. But because of technology and the ability to kind of reach out, that's ameliorated in some way. But the value, the whole idea of purpose changes because now the purpose isn't just to provide for, the purpose of companies isn't just to provide for their customers. The purpose is also to help their employees feel like they're part of a family, or to be empathic. And I'm not going to necessarily say parental, although maybe that's desirable in some situations, but certainly be able to tap into the humanity better than they have ever done before. And it's very clear that a lot of organizations aren't able to do this, by the way. Right. And I think there's going to be a bleed after this is over, and in a big way of talent. Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
Because people don't feel like they've got much in common with the companies they work for. Is that what you mean?
I think it's about purpose, right? Look, ultimately, and I don't want to tread in areas for which I'm not really the expert, but
go ahead, tread.
But ultimately, if you don't share the values that you hold with your employer, right? Yeah, that's a recipe for separation, if not disaster, right? If certainly there are priorities, and you can triage your own values in some ways in order to sacrifice some of them. Trade-off, I suppose. Trade-off might be a better word. There's some trade-offs that you make in order to enter into an employment agreement. Sometimes, your employer may not be everything. If you have 10 goals, they may meet 6 out of 10. That might be good enough if they're the right 6. But coming out of this crisis, I think whatever your 10 values were might change. I think they might for a lot of people. And I think a lot of companies are not going to change as quickly because it's not sometimes just not possible. That's the kind of culture change that has to happen from what is it? What's the expression? Turning a battleship, right? There's another friend of mine who is a killer author. I think he's hysterical. He's a very funny guy, but he's also very brilliant. His name is Joe Jaffe. Have you ever heard of Joseph Jaffe? Joseph Jaffe, he wrote this book here, Built to Suck. I highly recommend it. But Joe also wrote a couple great marketing books about the death of advertising. And he's an ad guy, right? So he was an ad guy for a long time, but he wrote a book called Zero, which is basically the number 0 refers to the amount of money that you should be spending on advertising, right? Here he is from the advertising world, but he's throwing a lot of bombs out there. But Built to Suck basically talks, kind of speaks to that point that turning around a battleship is frankly not going to cut it anymore. Because as you turn that battleship, there's going to be a lot of more agile, smaller players out there that are just going to go ahead and eat your lunch. So change has to be much more fundamental, and the environment. And this is before COVID even, and I think his work is even more relevant now. But there's so much out there about how values are becoming more important to talent. Just to circle back to the original point here, if we can remember what that was, the values are so important to talent. If the employers are not holding the same values, the talent is going to eventually say, you know what, I need to find some place that does, and there's going to be a big bleed. So right now in the US, of course, we've got 30 million people unemployed. Michael, you're there in Japan. I don't think the number is nearly that bad, but it's a little bit of a different cultural situation. But globally, we're
suffering here too.
Absolutely. And globally, we're seeing some terrible numbers. so for a while, I think people are just going to be grateful to have work, but, or they're going to strike out on their own and figure out new things to do. I mean, there's a lot of disruption coming, believe you me. But as far as staying where you are, which could be the smart play, you're going to have to weigh that, I think, individually and with your company and that's going to become a much, financial considerations aside, right? That is going to become a very important question to ask, more so, I think, ever before.
Well, right. So staying put, if we're not happy, may be a secondary choice, right? The first choice is pursuing something that's closer to our own purpose, our own values. And if there are people out there, sadly, there likely are people who are disengaged. And research tells us there are a lot of ambivalent or actively disengaged employees. Yeah. Then staying with the company may be a secondary choice, right? Not a primary choice of they're trying to create a career or a life experiences that are in line with the company. This actually comes up a lot in my work. So there's research that, and I think it was Kozes and Posner were among the first to write about the dividend of employee engagement on companies' financial performance. And one of the most fascinating things is the level of engagement between an employee and his or her company will increase modestly, but increase if you do nothing else but have that employee, have that person get clarity about his or her own values. If you were to do nothing else, you get a very modest increase in engagement there. On the flip side, if that same person is not clear about what he or she stands for, what their values are, but the company is very clear about what's important here, what do we value as a company, engagement actually goes down slightly.
Interesting. You would think it would be different than that. Why is that? Why is that?
I don't know for sure, but my guess is that it has something to do with self-determination theory. And if you want to learn about self-determination theory, Edward Deci's the grandfather of all of this. I think he wrote an amazing book called Why We Do What We Do. And Edward Deci. I think there are some answers in there. So my guess is, as it relates to self-determination theory, is that the company may unknowingly be what Deci would call interjecting their values onto employees. And forcing the employee to behave in a way that conforms with the company's values when the employee doesn't really have that same value. Now, like you said before, there's no need, at least from what I know, there's no need to have a complete map.
Yep.
Because nobody's values are completely 100% a map or fit with one another. So often when I'm working with companies on defining or instilling corporate values or aligning shared purpose, the conversations invariably lead to, well, what happens when the company's values are in conflict with my personal values?
Right.
And starting to do some planning around, well, in what kinds of situations might that happen? And how can I still live my values, find some common ground to live my values, do what's required by my company, and not feel like I'm sacrificing my own identity as a result, or as a result of working here, or in order to continue working here. And so we have structures to help people and teams kind of work through those issues.
Yeah.
So I think that's a natural part. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a natural part of many relationships. Different people have different values. Sure. We have different opinions about things and navigating it. But because work is such a prevalent part of modern life for so many people, it's something that it's important to take, to think about and think through. So that we can still respect and understand one another without having to necessarily sacrifice that identity, which would have a, which goes back to engagement.
Yeah, we're spending a third of our life or more at the office or with the people that we work with. It's the idea of sharing values, is whether or not it's a recent one or not, is still, I think it's natural that it's coming to the fore. I think now that maybe, as you said earlier, the society is over materialistic and, examining itself a little bit more. And now in the light of COVID-19, there's other things that are coming to the fore. I mean, in the businesses that I'm involved in, of course, we're seeing, just take energy, for example, right? We're seeing things like the change in behavior with regard to using fossil fuels or renewables, right? That due to COVID-19, nobody's driving. Nobody is power use is down, tremendously down. All of this leads to this knock-on effect where, and, combine this with what's going on, in oil markets, all this leads to a knock-on effect where oil is negatively valued, right? I mean, oil is its lowest ever, and without getting into too much about it, I guess the conventional wisdom is, oh, well, when something is that cheap, that's what people are going to use. Right. So, if oil is that cheap, well, then, watch, people will use gas more, they use oil more, but we don't live in that world anymore. Right. We live in a world that is increasingly value driven. And whether you think it's rational or not, purchasing decisions are not going to necessarily be based on the fact that something is cheaper than another thing. Right. We actually.
Are you seeing that?
Well, I'm not involved in that part of my business, but I will say, like, just looking at all the thought leadership that's out in the marketplace, and certainly in that sector, you're seeing more and more pushes to not only support renewables, but to push even harder toward them. It's almost like this is an opportunity to do that, but it's also it's it's a good thing to do. So it's nice to see this kind of good coming out of it. But that's a value driven thing in a lot of ways. I mean, it is companies. I also totally believe that companies would not move in that direction if there was no. If there wasn't a really excellent reason to do so from a business perspective either. But both of those things can be true at once, right? So
doesn't it go back to purpose?
Yeah, it does. That's right. It goes back to purpose.
Your excellent business reason to do it ideally would be grounded in the company's purpose.
Well, exactly. So that's a very fascinating tie together. I didn't actually think about that. That's if the purpose of a company is to improve society, if that's their stated purpose, and all of the employees, the thousands of employees that they have, are on board with that, then the company is kind of has to go in that direction, right? Rather than go against its own purpose. It's like, it's almost when you think, you have to sort of anthropomorphize a company more. You have to think of a company or an organization as a being, and if a being goes against their purpose, it's essentially akin to self-harm.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there's a lot more, that's a lot more visible now. It's a lot more, maybe, but we're getting into some areas that you are probably a little bit more, cognizant of than I am, for sure.
Well, I would expect there to be, I would expect there to be a vigorous debate, ongoing debate about what does, to benefit society actually mean, and how do we judge, in this particular situation, if our decision is in line with our values. And I think oftentimes, we have values to help us to help guide us when we need to make difficult decisions, particularly when we're in dilemmas, because there isn't a rule book. And, in the world today, in the work world today, the professional world today, there are so many situations where there's not a clear cut right and wrong. And at those times, I think often, whether we're aware of it or not, to some degree, we come back to our values to help us make those decisions. And if we're not sure what our values are, I think it's natural to look for a surrogate. Like, well, I don't know what the right thing to do is. What would my manager want me to do? What would the company want me to do? The company wants me to close the sale no matter what, or the company wants me to make sure that it's safe before I put it in front of the customer, or the company, if we don't know what's important to us and understand how that relates to what's expected of us, typically we go somewhere else to help make those decisions when there's no clear answer. And especially when we're in crisis and there's not and time is of the essence. Right, we have to make the decision quickly. What do we do? There's a great book by Dan Coyle.
Oh yeah,
called The Culture Code.
The Culture Code.
The Culture Code.
Got it right?
Yeah,
you can't see it, but I got it right there. Yes, The Culture Code.
Yeah. I've got it on my bookshelf back here too.
Yeah, he talks about the spaghetti experiment, the marshmallow and spaghetti experiment as part of the Culture Code. Yeah.
So I was actually thinking about two other separate chapters in that book. One is about the after action review. He talks about reviewing decisions as part of building team culture and having a very kind of open debrief about what happened without laying blame. And there's another chapter on Johnson & Johnson where they talk about how they handled the Tylenol scandal or crisis, right, in the 80s, and they went back to their credo to help them make decisions about what to do. Ultimately, they decided to voluntarily recall the product, which at the time was unheard of. Right?
Yeah, and even though they knew it wasn't their fault, right? The whole Tylenol thing wasn't even their fault. They did the right thing. Certainly from a corporate value standpoint and for their future outlook as a business. I mean, how much more respect did they get after that happens? It's funny you mentioned Coyle because in that same magazine that talked about This Old House, which for reference is the latest edition of Inc. magazine.
Okay.
Inc. There is a quiz. Are you a better manager than the average kindergartner? And it is based. It's part of a larger feature about navigating through crisis, about how your team can thrive in crisis, and it's talking about Daniel Coyle in this whole article, like for part TR. So it's interesting because I literally read that today. I hadn't thought about Dan Coyle in a while, and I took a look at that earlier today in preparation for our conversation, and lo and behold. You bring it up. See, we are simpatico in so many different ways, Michael.
This is why I love that.
This is why you let me be your friend for 20 years.
I don't know. We're going to have to do rock, paper, scissors to figure out who's the lucky one here.
Clearly you. Listen, I hate to say this, but I think we're out of time. This is exactly the way I want this time to go for my show, right? I want to spend time with people I care about, who are cool, who have cool things to say, and who just literally can show me new perspectives. And
awesome.
No, that's what I want. And look, we've known each other forever. I really wish we would have talked about pizza because frankly, I thought, well, if we're talking about shiteration, the whole idea of becoming a world-class pizza chef, which by the way, Michael is, that would be a gimme analogy for that one. I mean, it would have been too easy. maybe for you, but
well, that one, yeah, my journey, continuing journey. I feel like the USS Enterprise. My continuing journey definitely had a lot of iteration, which started off quite poorly.
Well, see, now put a pin in that, because that's a subject for another show right there. Pizza, because we can talk about pizza, and I know
I can talk about pizza.
I know what you lived in Jersey for a while. I mean, I'm a Jersey guy, but no pizza is better than Michael's Pizza. Excuse me. I'm sorry. That's a bold statement for my listeners, but you just simply don't know. You don't. I do.
I'm glad people can't see me blush.
So look, we talked about a lot. I think we ended up talking a lot about iteration, and about corporate culture, and about a little bit about, we touched on brand, and mostly values and corporate values and culture change. And I know that there were other things that Michael, you had in your little magic book there that you didn't quite get to. So let's save that for another time. I just want to thank you, because this has been a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to you normally. And this felt like, for the most part, the normal kind of conversation we usually have. I mean, our listeners might think maybe that makes us even more geeky, because we do talk about this stuff normally as friends anyway. But this is exactly, I think, what I wanted to get out of our chat tonight. And I hope that you had a good time.
I had a great time. Thanks for the conversation, man.
You're the best. Until my next guest.
Then I'll be the second guest.
Oh, man. So
rankmyguest.com.
You got it. All right. Thank you again, Michael. And we will definitely have you back on.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Google Play, or your podcast player of choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks again for listening.